'Tis I. Hey everyone, glad to see you back, glad to see you looking fresh, and today I'm going to talk about Pokkén tournaments. This game right here is a game that came out on the Wii U originally. I have the Switch variant because even though I owned a Wii U, I didn't really want to buy it then. I did want to buy it now because it had all the DLC. I think now, it was a few years ago now. It had all the characters, all the stuff in it, so yeah, it was a good time to jump into it. So Pokkén Tournament is a spin-off of the Pokemon franchise. Not the first time that's happened, but this game didn't really take off. It didn't become a cult classic. It didn't become a fan favorite. Nothing really like that. And I want to talk about why I think that happened. So first of all, it came out on the Wii U. Rough start. Set any franchise. I think like Splatoon is one of the only things that's really taken off from the Wii U era. Not many things from that era have really taken off, except like the successful Switch port. But Pokkén was not so lucky. It kind of came and went both times. When the DX variant came out, like more people could play it, and that's a great thing. I love that. In the early Switch days when Wii U games were being ported, more people would experience them. That was great. However, Pokemon fans didn't really latch onto it as much as I'm sure the franchise would have liked, and professional fighting game players also didn't really latch on. And I think that's probably because of the nature of the game. It's part arena fighter, part 2D fighter, and doesn't do either part necessarily that great. If you're going to do an arena fighter, really focus on the arena fighter part. If you're going to do a 2D fighter, really tune in on that because there's some incredible 2D fighters. If you're going to do both, it could work, I guess, in theory, to really nail both aspects of it, but you're really going to have to nail it, to create a new kind of idea on how these are going to play out. And I guess that's what they're hoping to do, but because they didn't fully nail it, both aspects of it feel floaty, feel weird, do not feel in cohesion with each other, the game didn't really take off. And I say this about fighting games a lot, is that if you're going to create a fighting game based on a franchise already, cater to the fans first, cater to the fans of the franchise first, and I think Pokemon did that okay. I think the design aspects of the game, like graphically, are a little strange. The character designs are a little odd. I like kind of the more realistic look that they're going for. I like it in idea more than in practice, but how the game looks, not my favorite thing in the world. And if you can't fully get the love of the franchise fan base, go for the hardcores, go for the people that are going to play this daily, train it, become the best in the world. And this game didn't really have that either. Like I said, arena fighter players seem to just like those, 2D players just like those. It's hard to get the idea of both to come together for this. It tried to carve out a new niche, and it didn't really succeed in that. I would have preferred it just being 2D. Some people probably would have preferred it just being 3D. I don't know anyone that likes it both ways. I think the biggest weird part for me, though, was the roster. I like in some ways how weird it gets, including Pokemon like Chandelure and Suicune. On paper, seem interesting and cool, but for me, if I was going to build a roster for this, which I will do, like, let's talk about who I would include in the roster. So I do think they included some correct choices when building this roster. When it was first announced, in that weird trailer, not really a trailer, like a weird hint idea of what this thing could be, it was Blaziken and Lucario. Two great choices. But with those two Pokemon, what stuck out to me is that they were both fighting types. And so I was like, is the roster going to be just fighting type Pokemon? And I kind of ran with this idea. It's like, could you build a whole roster with that? And yes, you can. And I'll get into that in a second. But then I kind of went with it further. It's like, okay, so Pokemon could do this whole idea where each type got their own game style. Like, you could do a Luigi's Mansion-esque game with ghost types. You could do a farming game with grass types. You could do a fishing game with water types. Like, plethora of ideas started spinning in my head. But fighting game with fighting types seemed the easiest to do. And then they started showing off Pokemon that weren't fighting types, and I was like Charizard and Pikachu, obviously they were going to do that, but for me, I think letting fighting types get their moment in the spotlight. Because it's a type that's not really the best in the game, it's not the worst in the game, it's kind of right down the middle, like let those guys be it for a chance. So, if I was to build a roster, who would I put on it? I'd put 25 fighting types in a game. And so I compiled a list of 25 fighting types to put in the game. And different variations. I grouped them differently to talk about them all. The game came out in 2015, so I'm only allowed up to Gen 6. I did include one Gen 7 because a lot of spin-off games kind of hint at the upcoming generation, such as like Munchlax being in Red Rescue Team, Blue Rescue Team way back in the day. Stuff like that does happen. So I allow myself one Gen 7, but other than that, exclusively Gen 1 through 6, and I still was able to fill out the roster, and not every fighting type was included even then. To start off, Lucario, Blaziken, and Machamp all in the game. I think these are 3 stars. I think having Machamp be the face of the franchise is super easy. Like, if we had a sequel and some got cut, Machamp needs to be the face. Like, the fighting, he's got the belt on and everything. He's the champ. Easy peasy, in my opinion, to have those 3 be the stars of the show, but Machamp be the face of the franchise. Up next, we got the rest of the Gen 1 stuff. Primeape, Poliwrath. That was the most fun one thinking about this way back when, before the game came out. When, if it was going to be a full fighting type roster, like, I was going to name Poliwrath, because who the heck's going to play Poliwrath? Like, people forget he's a fighting type all the time. He's more of a forgotten Pokemon, but I've always loved him. And so having him be, like, my guy, that was going to be a lot of fun. Primeape, I mean, now would be Annihilate, but obviously that didn't exist back then, so Primeape would have been a cool addition as well, more of a frenzied, fast fighter. Then the Hypnons, Hypnon-chan, Hypnon-top, Hypnon-Lee, of course, these 3 guys, the trio, and I contemplating putting Tyrogue as well, but, I mean, when making some cuts, having 4 of a family seemed like a lot, but having all 3 Hitmons seemed like a given. Like, obviously those guys, I mean, they should have been in the base, but not any of them were. But they seem pretty obvious to me. Next up, these 2 didn't really have a spot to go. They both deserve to be here, for sure, but the groupings kind of were a little weird when making them. We have Heracross and Gallade. I love both of these guys. I think they're both super cool, both iconic, and they both deserve to be here. It's just that simple. Gallade's more straightforward, more slashy fighting style, but still a fighting type. And Heracross would be fighting more with his horn, be a whole different moveset than the whole rest of the game would have. Next up, we got some of our Gen 3 representation, Breloom, Hariyama. 2 very different fighting styles. Breloom would be a lot quicker. Hariyama would be a lot slower, more heavy hitter. Just think of them in concept. It writes itself, the movesets. So next up, we have the starter pack. We have Infernape, Emboar, Chestnut. Of course, we still had Blaziken up front, but the rest of the fighting type starter Pokemon, yeah, in the future Quaquaval as well, but these 3 were the ones we had on top of Blaziken at the time, so these are the 3 I'm putting in the game. Next up, the little guys. I wanted to include some smaller reps, not fully evolved Pokemon. I think Scraggy and Krogunk are the best choices in there. Krogunk's in the game already, great choice. Scraggy is not, but these are our little guys, smaller hitboxes, more interesting than their evolutions when creating movesets, so that's why I included the pre-evolutions when talking about these guys. Sock and Throw, the Gen 5, they call these the Echo Fighters of each other. One's a little bit slower, hits a little harder, one's a little bit faster, and hits a little bit less. Like I said, you call them clones of each other, I mean, that's fair enough, but I think they're cool palette swaps, and like their designs are pretty similar, so they should be included together. The Gen 6 reps, Howlucha, Pangoro. I think that these guys are iconic enough. It's crazy to me that Howlucha wasn't included, and I think he should have been. Like, he's a wrestler designed, he's a very first flying fighting type. It seemed pretty obvious to me. Pangoro is a little bit different out there, but still pretty cool. And then we have 3 legendaries. And this is where you can get the weirdness out of your system. You have the Sword of Justice trio. You have Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, all fighting types. You have a trio there. You have those be like the 3 Grandmasters of the story mode or whatever you want to do. Or like, because this game still has trainers, like the 3 Grandmasters all have one of the Sword of Justice, and you gotta go fight them, and then you can unlock them. Like, that's the classic. You beat them in the story mode, and then you can use them against your friends. Like, it's pretty obvious. And then the final roster pick would be Beware. I think Beware is more iconic than a lot of other fighting types from Gen 7. I think he's a great lead up to it. I think he was announced ahead of time anyway, so it's just a great fill in, and plus he doesn't look like a fighting type as much as some other Pokemon. I was thinking about like Crabrawler to have a weird little Crabman and like DLC in future aspects. You could very include them if we could have got sequels, include them there. And then I think with sequels is where you can include like more fighting types. You can include the Megas that I didn't talk about, but just those there. Those aren't all the fighting types that existed from Gen 1 through 6. I did cut a couple of my lesser favorites. Like I said, I didn't include any of the Megas, but all of them could have created an awesome fighting game that I don't understand why they kind of went the route they did. I think once they were like, we have to include Charizard and Pikachu, then they're like, all right, gloves off. Any Pokemon's eligible, and then they put in like Chandelure and Decidueye down the line and like a weird Shadow Mewtwo that doesn't make any sense. But to me, it should have been all fighting types. That's the roster I would have chosen. But yeah, have you played Pokkén Tournament? Do you like it? Have you played it professionally? That'd be awesome to hear. Yeah, I'd love to hear stories of people that played it professionally. That's all I'll do for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, like this if you like this, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you at some point.